welcome to Halloween for grown-ups. This will take approximately an hour, and I've tried to use the principle of trim to trim it down, but I found so many great photographs in our archive that I have to show you the best. So this is my dedication, and for those who can't read this in the back, I will read it. Dominic Bruzzese was a New Rochelle resident, employee of the Department of Public Works, and later a police officer of the New Rochelle Police Department. His fascination for New Rochelle history was encouraged by a meeting with historian Morgan Secord, and they agreed that photo documentation had a paramount importance for the preservation of the city's social history. From the 1940s, Mr. Bruzzese assiduously collected and photographed city scenes in New Rochelle. A significant portion of these photos reflect his police experience with photography of crime scenes, traffic accidents, and police departments' functions and personnel. He was equally adept at collecting New Rochelle photography of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and near the end of his life, he donated his photography to the New Rochelle Public Library Archive. And this is where I get the title for my talk, songwriter and wonderful guitarist Richard Thompson. So this is my overture to a photo opera. For the past 6 months, I have been organizing an archival collection of photography of New Rochelle that is the most vivid and representative photo history of the city that exists. I felt impelled to showcase this collection and to share the photography with the community, and so here we are today. The most important point is this. All the photography that you will see this afternoon is from the library's archive. As you know, an archive is a collection of original documents, and photographs, of course, are documents. Most of these images depict scenes of New Rochelle, many do not. In some cases, I lack information due to missing photo captions, but I use no other source for these images than the photographic collection of our archive. I did not purchase or borrow photos from Google Images or elsewhere. Second, I have not written captions for any of the photos that you will see on the screen. Instead, I will present a narrative that includes my commentary on the photos, quotations from many authors, and poetry. I selected the most evocative and thought-provoking photos, along with ones that best represent overlooked aspects of everyday life in New Rochelle. I invite you to follow these 3 themes. 1, historical, the history of New Rochelle expressed in photos. 2, archival, discussion of the photos themselves as physical artifacts and documentary evidence. And 3, everyday life, reflections on life in the cityscape of New Rochelle. My art is the art of juxtaposition. You will see a sequence of images and hear readings from many texts. My intention is that the images will intensify the text as the text brings forth haunting qualities from the images. Of his book, Dubliners, James Joyce wrote, quote, "My intention is to write a chapter of the moral history of my country, and I chose Dublin for the scene because that city seemed to me the center of paralysis. In its present paralysis, it remains a ghost, the ghost of the great conception of the city that polarizes the mind of Europe. It is a shell of grandeur populated by wraiths." End of quote. This photo depicts a Huguenot cemetery in New Rochelle destroyed in the construction of I-95. We might say that New Rochelle is a shell of Huguenot history populated by wraiths, that its history has yet to be presented in full detail to the world. This passage is from Ways of Seeing by John Berger. Quote, "Seeing comes before words. The child looks and recognizes before it can speak. But there is also another sense in which seeing comes before words. It is seeing which establishes our place in the surrounding world. We explain that world with words, but words can never undo the fact that we are surrounded by it." He continues, "An image is a sight that has been recreated or reproduced. Every image embodies a way of seeing. Even a photograph. For photographs are not, as is often assumed, just a mechanical record. Every time we look at a photograph, we are aware, however slightly, of the photographer selecting that site from an infinity of other possible sites. This is true even in the most casual family snapshot. Thomas Paine was New Rochelle's most radical citizen. This is the dirt road approach to his house and farm as it appeared in 1878. The British writer William Cobbett at first reviled and then deified Paine. 10 years after Paine's death, Cobbett decided that he would exhume the decade-old corpse of Thomas Paine from his long-forgotten grave on deserted New Rochelle farmland. He would then sail with it to London and there construct a grand mausoleum that he believed the greatest hero of the century truly deserved. The digging was difficult. Finally, the deteriorating cadaver was fully unearthed and transferred to a box less unwieldy than its mahogany casket. As the local sheriffs drew closer in pursuit, Cobbett and his band of grave robbers ran, fumbling with their cargo, barely outracing the deputies to New Rochelle's Hudson Park dock. The following week, they sailed with the corpse to England. During a customs inspection at Liverpool on November 21st, 1819, Cobbett opened his luggage and, revealing the body, announced, "There, gentlemen, are the mortal remains of the immortal Thomas Paine." The authorities were neither amused nor impressed. When he arrived in London, the English government refused permission for Cobbett's plans for a colossal statue of Paine. The incident became a national joke and an embarrassing scandal for Cobbett, especially after he began to exhibit the bones for a tuppence fee. He became known as the Resurrection Man, leading to the popular nursery rhyme, "Poor Tom Paine, there he lies. Nobody laughs and nobody cries. Where he is gone or how he fares, nobody knows and nobody cares." Of course, that's not to slight our good friends from the Thomas Paine Cottage. I think we should all be reading Thomas Paine. This may be my favorite photograph of all. This is Reed's Mill on Eastchester Mill Creek in 1890. Left to right are Jeannie Pearson, Mamie Jennings, and Florence Van Gaspik. The photo reminds me of the French photographer Edouard Baudu, and it also reminds me of this grandiose appreciation of Paris. How many ghosts stroll here? What people have lived before you under this ceiling? What secrets have these walls heard? What scenes of crime, of seduction, of joy or despair have these mirrors reflected? The flagstones of this dark walk echoed under the steps of Molière. On this iron banister, the hand of Voltaire rested. In front of this small mirror of a cramped house on the Rue Saint-Honoré, Robespierre knotted his tie on the morning of 9 Thermidor. This historical perspective must not be ridiculed. The great soul of Paris is made of these reminiscences. End of quote. May I suggest that the great soul of New Rochelle is constructed from these photographs. This passage is from David Campany's book, On Photographs. Quote, "Photographs are often thought of as ways to hold things still, to calm the flux of a restless world. They allow us to gaze at fixed appearances for pleasure or knowledge or both, but very little else about them could be considered still. From the beginning," he continues, "photography's technologies have been in a state of constant change and development, and the task we have given the medium have continued to mutate and expand beyond measure. Moreover, photographs are highly mobile. They move over time, across cultures, and between contexts. They lose meanings and acquire meanings. This photo is maybe devoid of meaning until one learns it was James Pugsley's house that General William Howe used for his military headquarters in 1776. He goes on, "Photographs confuse as much as fascinate, conceal as much as reveal, distract as much as compel. They are unpredictable communicators. They cannot carry meanings in any straightforward way. A single photograph is unable to account for the appearance it describes or even account for itself. Like Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, a photograph is insistently there, yet enigmatic. Now, in our collection, we find very few home interiors, but this is an exception. The bedroom of Millicent Stevenson on 77 Maple Avenue in New Rochelle in 1897. The old homestead at Pelham Road and Locust Avenue. The 7-Up ad on a building on Division Street. An African-American neighborhood on Cedar Street. Powers Lane. And Broadview. The history of photography consists of a bewildering variety of photo processes. This image is a cyanotype from a cyan blue printing process. Our archival collection includes daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, tin types, lantern slides, glass plate negatives, cabinet cards, studio photography, street photography, aerial photography, printing plates, glossy prints, Polaroids, Kodak snapshots, and digital photography. This is Saul's Army and Navy store, which sold overalls and unionalls, shirts and pants by Lee, sheep-lined jackets and Mackinaw coats. I dated the photo to 1938 based on a poster ad for the movie Coconut Grove at the far left. The signs read, "Schechter's removal sale. Stop, look. This busy corner is forced to move out on account of building to be torn down. A complete line of men's and children's clothing, furnishings, hats, and shoes must be disposed of in a short time at half their value. Last 12 days, get busy and save. I am forced to move out." The Motzkin brothers were dry cleaners. New Rochelle once boasted many manufacturing companies, including aviation products, die castings, photo equipment, and a 7-Up bottling plant, among many others. This is Avenue E. Note the building sign on the right, National Model Aircraft and Supply Company. This is the original New Rochelle City Hall, next door to Ardsley Curtains and Linens. Note the cupola and clock atop the building. These will turn up later in this talk. History is the sensation of being alive at another time. With the rise of the middle class in the late 19th century, Starin's Glen Island made New Rochelle a tourist destination as waterfront sports expanded with yacht clubs and rowing clubs at Hudson Park. There were also traveling carnivals. This one was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In James Joyce's Ulysses, Stephen Dedalus is asked, "What is a ghost?" His answer, "One who is fated into impalpability through death, through absence, or through change of manners." End of quote. The photographic instabilities of this image may prompt one to think that a spectral image emanates from the photo itself. Does it reveal a ghost? All these men are art students. The year is 1896. The city is Paris, France, and the location is the Académie Julienne, a private art school founded by the French painter Rodolphe Julien. In this crowd of aspiring artists are the Leyendecker brothers, Frank and Joseph, famed illustrators who later lived in New Rochelle. This photo and several others are from Frank's scrapbook, which is in our archive. Paris has long been fetishized as a tourist destination, and from the literary critic Roger Calois, we learn, quote, "The Paris that the tourist knows is not the only, nor even the true Paris, but rather a brilliantly lit decor, which hides another Paris, the real Paris, the ghostly Paris, nocturnal, elusive, and all the more powerful as it is the more secret, and which at every sight and at every moment comes to mix itself dangerously with the other Paris. This is the first of 3 studio photographs labeled Van Zelm. The Van Zelm family of New Rochelle included a cartoonist and the president of the New Rochelle Trust Company. But I have yet to discover the identity of the Van Zelm performers here. In 1852, Natalie Hertzen wrote to her famous cousin, Alexander Hertzen, quote, "Looking at your letters, at your portrait, thinking of my letters, of my bracelet, I have wished I could skip 100 years and see what their fate would be. The things which have been for us holy relics, which have healed us body and soul, with which we have talked and which have to some extent deputized for us to each other in absence. All these weapons with which we have defended ourselves from others, from the blows of fate, from ourselves. What will they be when we are gone? Will their virtue, their soul remain in them? Will they awake? Will they warm some other heart? Will they tell us the story of us, of our sufferings, of our love? Will they win the reward of a single tear? How sad I feel when I imagine that your portrait will one day hang unknown in someone's study, or that a child perhaps will play with it and break the glass and efface the features." This New Rochelle baseball scene bristles with camaraderie and athletic energy, but the identity of the players is unknown. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Pliny the Younger stated, "It is a noble employment to rescue from oblivion those who deserve to be remembered." Our archival collections provide some assurance that the talents and accomplishments of our citizens will be remembered. New Rochelle native Kent Washington made history as the first Black American to play professional basketball in a European communist country, Poland, where he witnessed the beginning of the Solidarity movement in 1980 as he amazed the Poles with his versatility on the basketball court. The library deeply appreciates his donation of personal basketball memorabilia to our archive. And Kent is actually in the audience today. Can you raise your hand, Kent? Thank you, Kent. Thank you. These are soldiers from New Rochelle who died during World War I. On the left, Walter Brown died of disease, probably influenza, at Camp Lee, Virginia in 1918. On the right, Robert Bartels, reason for death unknown. Oscar Wilde wrote, quote, "Sorrow is the supreme emotion of which people are capable, at once the type and the test of all great art. Behind sorrow, there is always more sorrow. Pain, unlike pleasure, wears no mask. Sorrow is the only truth, an intense, extraordinary reality. Whatever happens to another happens to oneself." This is the seawall at Hudson Park in 1940. At the right stands a young man, the most consequential person in this history, Dominic Bruzzese. Mr. Bruzzese was born on January 20th, 1919 at 410 Main Street. He was a lifelong resident of New Rochelle. His first job was at the so-called City Yard at 211 East Main Street, the location of the city's sewage plant. He stated, quote, "I started with the city in 1940 as a utility man, left for the police department in 1946. I was a chauffeur when I left," end quote. Patrolman Bruzzese rose to the rank of lieutenant as his interest in the photographic history of New Rochelle grew and grew. He collected vintage photography. He was obsessive, and he was a completist. He started out as a collector, then proceeded to direct observation with his own camera. By the 1960s, he was taking hundreds of photos himself. Late in life, he proudly stated to a news reporter about his hobby, "I wore out 3 cameras." In this 1947 photo of room 117 of the Albert Leonard High School, are civil service and school officials, with Patrolman Dominic Bruzzese at the far right, looking just a bit sleepy. Here is Lieutenant Bruzzese at a proceeding of the judge's chambers at 23 Lawton Street. Can you find him? His own note on the reverse of the photo print was, "I am under the clock." Surely we can compare this with Where's Waldo? And it should come as no surprise that thanks to his police connections, our archive of photography includes mugshots like this and photos of crime scenes. These footprints in the snow led a detective to a dump of empty bottles of booze, the backyard waste of Mary Hall's Speakeasy and Pop McGee's gambling room, December 29th, 1944. This is a passage from Visions of Cody by Jack Kerouac. Quote, "Saturday night is to be found in the red brick wall behind the neon lights. It's now infinitely bleaker than ever, like the iron fire escapes at the blind wall sides of those great fat movie auditoriums that squat like frogs in business-like real estate. The back places of what we call downtown, the nameless tunnels, alleys, sidings, platforms, ramps, ash heaps, miniature dumps, unofficial parking lots fit for murders, the filthy covered with rags plazas that you see at the foot of great red brick chimneys." End quote. Now, it is not my intention to go slumming through history in back alleys, but someone took this photo deliberately, and I can only wonder why. Pictorially, it is interesting, but the personal intention remains elusive, lost to history. A fellow named Arthur Fellig became the most notorious street photographer in New York City, taking sensational photographs of crime scenes. He promoted himself as Ouija the Famous. He hung out at the Manhattan Police Department headquarters, and when a story broke about a crime, he rushed to the scene with his camera. Dominic Bruzzese might be styled the Ouija of New Rochelle, and his interest in street life, car accidents, and nocturnal photography put him in a class of his own. He seldom took photos of wealthy neighborhoods, and he did not always think in pictorial terms. He was more of a collector, a chronicler, an information gatherer. This accident occurred January 31st, 1950. The car is stressed, and as you can detect, so is the original photograph. Very often, his fellow policemen were the photographers and the victims. Multiple injuries from this railroad accident in 1891 led to the creation of the New Rochelle Hospital the following year in the home of Eliza Moulton on Huguenot Street, opposite Trinity Church. Malaria, typhoid fever, and bacterial infections were rampant in New Rochelle, and the city desperately needed that hospital. In his survey of New Rochelle, Bruzzese learned to see photographically. His perspective was that of a documentarian, not an artist. However, like the Parisian photographer Eugene Atget, he reveled in the hidden Gothic details in the depiction of space and place. Like Atget, he revealed the significance of the commonplace in his catalog of the city's topography and its public architecture, and its accidental events that would be quickly forgotten if not for the photographic record. The comparison with the great Atka is apt, for Bruzzese ultimately presented the city as a pictorial and archaeological museum, even when it encountered the accidental. This approach is not nostalgia for the innocent past, but scene after scene from the city's underside, so to speak. Photos like this arrive off the beaten path. This is rush hour on North Avenue in 1950. Main Street and Allard. I believe the person that's on the ground survived. Not long after cars were invented, the automobile race was invented. This was the Briarcliff Auto Race in Westchester County near the county poorhouse in 1908. Our fixation on speed is a constant with every technological development. And this astonishing shot is an aerial photo of hundreds of cars at the Elmsford Drive-In Theater adjacent to Route 9A in 1954. How do we explain sunlight and lengthening shadows at a nighttime event? Well, it was opening night for the drive-in and most patrons arrived early. In a pattern language, Christopher Alexander states, quote, "Cars give people wonderful freedom and increase their opportunities, but they also destroy the environment to an extent so drastic that they kill all social life. The fact that cars are large is the most serious aspect of a transportation system based on the use of cars. When people use cars, each person occupies almost 100 times the space as he does when he is a pedestrian." He continues, "People cannot maintain their spiritual roots and their connections to the past if the physical world they live in does not also sustain these roots. But modern society often ignores the psychological importance of sites that embody our relationship to the land and the past. They are bulldozed, developed, changed, and for political and economic reasons, without regard for these simple but fundamental emotional matters, or they are simply ignored." The advent of the automobile gave rise to services we know so well. The signs at this Conoco filling station read, "Cars washed, polished, and Simonized. Flats fixed. Auto repairman specialists of Ford. The greatest in our history, Amico. Super Shell cuts the cost of stop-and-go driving." This is a side street at the Thanhouser Film Corporation. The philosopher Walter Benjamin believed we might reveal the reality of vanished lives in the detritus of history, that we could capture the portrait of history in the most insignificant representations of reality, in its scraps, as it were. This is Swift used cars on Harrison Street. The car front and center is a Packard Clipper. In his theses on the philosophy of history, Walter Benjamin ruminates on the angel of history based on the painting Angelus Novus by Paul Klee. Quote, "This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage, and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise, and it has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. This storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress." We might title this photo, "The Mystery and Melancholy of a Street," after a famous painting of a deserted public space by the surrealist Giorgio de Chirico. The ads in this evocative photo are for Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And this sleepy side street seems saturated with the feeling of the dog days of August. This intersection at Huguenot and North Avenue seems relatively quiet and relaxed compared to the commotion and noisy construction there this past summer. Now here's a man who seems very proud of his car. The original photo caption reads, "New York World's Fair license plate." This photo was taken on Pinebrook Boulevard, December 3rd, 1949. The smiling woman is leaving her car, but she might have taken a trolley. This is the Glen Island trolley at Mechanic and Huguenot Streets. At first, trolleys were horse-drawn, By the 1880s, most American cities had converted to electric power provided from overhead catenary wires. Streetcar companies laid track to the very fringes of the city, greatly increasing urban expansion. I dated this photo to 1938 from the advertisement on the left for the Great Waltz. The American poet and polymath Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote a poem that likened the mystery of electric propulsion to witchcraft in 17th century New England. The poem, The Broomstick Train, or The Return of the Witches, ended with this verse. Often you've looked on a rushing train, but just what moved it was not so plain. It couldn't be those wires above, for they could neither pull nor shove. Where was the motor that made it go? You couldn't guess, but now you know. Some trolleys operated as street sweepers, and others as snowplows. This photo dates from 1902. Toonerville Folks was a popular cartoon that ran from 1908 to 1955 and featured the Toonerville Trolley, based on a rattletrap streetcar in Pelham, New York. On July 31st, 1937, the streetcar that inspired the Toonerville Trolley made its final trip through downtown Pelham with much fanfare and hoopla, and this was the scene. The old settlement of New Rochelle became a zone of work, but the laborers who toiled here, like this man cleaning trolley tracks, are now absent, siphoned off from recognition and erased from memory, except for scant traces in the photographic record. Westchester County also operated a bus transportation system long before the B line. This is the county bus at North and Main Street at the New Rochelle Telegraph Office. The Willowbrook Dairy of Mount Vernon, New York, delivered fresh cold milk in glass bottles to residences of southern Westchester. Here it stops on Crescent Avenue in 1930. This scan from a tiny photo about that big was marked New Rochelle, but it seems to me a Manhattan scene. And this was the triple menace to pedestrians in the 1950s: the truck, the trolley, the automobile. Trolleys appeared in artwork and parodies appeared in poetry, as in this parody of Hamlet's soliloquy entitled Complications of Painting versus Photography. To paint or photograph, that is the question. Whether 'tis more to my advantage to color photographic accidents and call them paintings, or squeeze the bulb against a sea of critics and by exposure kill them. New Rochelle once had a railroad freight yard until it was obliterated with the coming of I-95. This poem from 1857 is entitled Photography Compared to Railroads. Where boys and girls pursued their sports, a locomotive puffs and snorts and gets my malediction. The turf is dust, the elves have fled, the ponds have shrunk, and tastes have spread to photograph and fiction. Here we see the New Rochelle train station with the Kaufman building under construction in the background. We now use this train station for Metro North and Amtrak. This is the interior after renovation in 1990. The next sequence of photos depicts the city yard of the Department of Public Works. This is where Mr. Bruzzese worked prior to his joining the police department. In 1913, the New Rochelle Women's Club led the fight for urban sanitation as the best investment for the city. For most of the 20th century, the city yard was located on the waterfront on East Main Street until the 1960s, when a movement began for its relocation. I have a notion to write an essay or a blog titled The Romance of Sewers and Drains, based on documents of the Commissioners of Sewers and Drainage in our archive, inspired by the dilapidated landscape of the city yard. This is the east side of the waste disposal plant of the city yard, November 15th, 1938. And this photo depicts the congestion of waste in the overcrowded furnaces of the city yard incinerator. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but there are, in the dead center of this photograph, are 6 men. During the 1890s, American cities grew at an astounding rate, and the growth of their infrastructure expanded accordingly. In New Rochelle, the Commissioners of Sewers and Drainage were responsible for the construction and maintenance of sewers and drainage culverts. In the 1890s, the city engineer was Horace Crosby, a civil engineer who laid out many of the city's exclusive neighborhoods. Mr. Crosby also became the first president of the New Rochelle Public Library Board and was long known as the father of the library. With the new city charter, the Board of Public Works superseded the Commissioners of Sewers and Drainage. And today, municipal engineering and the maintenance of infrastructure is handled by the Department of Public Works. Our archival collection of the Commissioners of Sewage and Drainage consists of original documents pertaining to the planning, maintenance, and financing the construction of sewers to ensure proper drainage. The documents include proposals, contracts, work plans, and maps. This photo depicts the control center for the sewage screening plant at the city yard. And overhead is a 5-ton crane. This is the Worthington pump at the Union Corners pump station of the New Rochelle Water Company. I think you will agree that this looks like a formidable machine. This was the product of Worthington and Baker, which manufactured hydraulic machinery for the steamship industry, mining, pipelining, and waterworks. This is New Rochelle Cleanup Week in 1953. Shall we call this the precursor to Earth Day? Now, Morgan Secord was a native of New Rochelle, prominent attorney and historian of the city. A descendant of the original Huguenot founders, he practiced law on Lawton Street, a few doors away from this library. He was a genealogist of his Huguenot family and president of the Huguenot and New Rochelle Historical Association. His influence on Dominic Bruzzese was profound. I find it curious that his home in this photo is juxtaposed with a truck of the Department of Public Works, Dominic's employer, before he joined the police department. This is the undernourished class at an unidentified New Rochelle school. These students were served milk at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. each day. The class appears integrated. There are 13 Black children in the group. On the wall are the paintings Madonna and Child at the right, and the Angelus by Jean-Francois Millet at the left. Millet's Angelus was a ubiquitous and popular sentimental religious subject in the 19th century. This is the Albert Leonard Junior High School Band, May 11th, 1939. The Loyal Order of Moose is a service organization originally headquartered in Mooseheart, Illinois. This is the junior chapter in New Rochelle. And this drum majorette leads the way at the annual Thanksgiving parade on Main Street. There are only a few wedding photos in our collection. This is the wedding of Elizabeth Huntington Coley and John Futhy Fox in 1928. The banner during the Great Depression advertises an exposition at the New Rochelle Armory. The letters NRA stand for the National Recovery Administration, an essential part of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. This 1944 billboard advertises Cheez-It crackers. At the lower right, a smaller sign reads, "Back the attack with war bonds." During World War II, gasoline and food rationing had a big impact on household economy. Cigarettes were also rationed. This 1943 photo shows a line of New Rochelle smokers waiting to purchase cigarettes at Schultz's cigar store at the corner of Lawton on Main. Snow provokes a feeling of floating in empty space through an abundance of light that becomes white darkness. A desolate and slushy winter scene. This 1963 photo was taken by Charles Jordan of the Department of Public Works. The denizens of Hudson Park included mute swans. It is said that the souls of poets transform into swans. If that is so, we seem to have poets from Sappho to T.S. Eliot assembled here. This poem is The Silver Swan by Orlando Gibbons. The silver swan, who living had no note, when death approached, unlocked her silent throat. Leaning her breast against the reedy shore, thus sung her first and last, and sung no more. Farewell all joy, O death, come close mine eyes. More geese than swans now live, more fools than wise. Human flyers also prevailed in New Rochelle in the 1920s, the early days of flight. This single propeller biplane is shown at the so-called Scarsdale Landing Field in New Rochelle. This is a Handley Page biplane en route to Karachi from via Cairo. The Handley Page was one of the largest biplanes ever made. The U.S. Army Signal Corps caption to this photo reads, quote, "These cooks are Italian soldiers who were captured by the Nazis in Sicily and North Africa. They are now members of an Italian service unit who volunteered for work at U.S. military establishments. These voluntary groups of former prisoners of war are organized to aid the U.S. Army in any duties except military combat as provided by the Geneva Convention. In many cases, they have released military personnel for combat duty." When President Franklin Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, the democracies of the world mourned a revered leader. These are U.S. soldiers stationed in Montemelone, Italy, marching to church to honor FDR at a funeral service. The next sequence of photos relates to the National War Fund, an umbrella agency during World War II that supported the United Service Organizations, popularly known as the USO. The National War Fund existed from 1942 to 1947. This photo depicts an American relief vehicle in Lille after the liberation of France. Now, this is an extraordinary photograph. It shows two young boys attempting a supremely perilous crossing of a demolished railroad bridge. I know nothing about it other than what you see. Do we recognize anyone here? The man in the suit and tie is Bob Hope, the first major celebrity to join the USO to support American servicemen and women during World War II. In 1997, he was designated an honorary veteran for his humanitarian services to the U.S. Armed Forces. He's the only individual in history to have earned this honor. But while we easily recognize Bob Hope, he's surrounded by others we don't recognize. In her book, Regarding the Pain of Others, Susan Sontag writes, quote, "To grant only the famous their names demotes the rest to representative instances of their occupations, their ethnicities, and their plights." This group is enjoying a USO show, but is also a reminder that the U.S. Navy remained segregated through the war until 1946. With his gear cast aside, a sergeant first class at a grand piano presents an unlikely but poignant image of a world at war. This is a photograph by Roman Vishniav, a Russian-American photographer best known for his photography documenting the Jews of Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. I believe that there is nothing more beautiful than a child laughing. Sontag's book regarding the pain of others is a meditation on photographic representations of war and violence. She asks, quote, "What is the purpose of showing the atrocities of war? How does the spectacle of suffering in the media affect us? Are we inured to violence by the depiction of cruelty and atrocity?" In the background of this photograph, we find 2 of the 4 Freedoms posters done by Norman Rockwell. And so we come full circle back to New Rochelle. The 4 freedoms, freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of speech, and freedom of worship, were first articulated by President Franklin Roosevelt in his 1941 State of the Union address. Eleanor Roosevelt incorporated these ideas in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. FDR presented the 4 freedoms as universal principles in the war against fascism, and Norman Rockwell rendered them in his poster illustrations with patriotic reverence. This is the library of La Rochelle, France, the sister city of New Rochelle. The old harbor of La Rochelle became a German submarine base during World War II. La Rochelle was the last French city to be liberated at the end of the war. The famous Hotel de Ville in La Rochelle was severely damaged by fire in 2013, but later restored. Now, this is not the interior of that hotel, but the Thanhouser Film Company, an early film company of the era of silent films, was based in New Rochelle from 1909 to 1913, when it was destroyed by fire. The company produced over 1,000 films to worldwide distribution. This studio was utilized in many Thanhouser productions, and the following sample of production stills are just a few from the several hundred in our archival collection. With these production stills, I will read from the poem Her Picture by Homer Fort in 1900. He took her picture in a chair with books and works of art around. The proof, she said, was more than fair, but then no atmosphere was found. He took her picture in the sand, a nymph disporting by the shore. The scene, she cried, was nice and grand. It only lacked the ocean's roar. He took her picture by a wheel, a Grecian maid who spins and nods. Alas, she thought it would reveal the early lights of ancient gods. He took her picture by flashlight, where smoke and smell will often linger. Her joy was boundless, out of sight. It showed the gem upon her finger. Thomas Manville was a wealthy New Rochelle resident of the gated waterfront community of Premium Point. Manville had the dubious distinction of an entry in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most marriages, 13 marriages to 11 women. He inherited a family fortune based on asbestos products, and he was an expert in quickie divorces, peephole doors, and travel to Nevada. Irving Berlin's song, What Chance Have I with Love, includes the lyric, Tommy Manville's love is not returned. He sells asbestos, and he has learned that with asbestos, he still gets burned. My personal title for this Thanhouser photo is A Refreshing Splash of Champagne. Perhaps this happened to Mr. Manville. We just don't know. In the film The Early Life of David Copperfield, the actress Fiona Foster played the leading role of David Copperfield. This production still is from the film Willie the Wild Man. So the next sequence features the nocturnal photography and my reading from an archival typescript of Benjamin Eli Smith on spectral appearances and mental processes. This is long. I hope you can endure it. I hope I can endure it. But here we go. Dr. Smith, by the way, was a lexicographer. He was managing editor of the Century Dictionary and a member of the New Rochelle Board of Education and a personal friend of Albert Leonard, for whom our high school is named. I propose to say a few things about certain curious phenomena which appear in the extreme borderland of our conscious life. They are what we may be called ghosts of the mind. They form a world apart from ordinary experience and familiar ideas. It is a world of spectral appearances, of mental processes which seem to be affected by beings outside of or below the consciousness of the mind in which they occur, of weird and seemingly supernatural powers. They lie broadcast over the surface of history. No matter where you open its pages, you'll find them recorded under the name of divinations, inspirations, demoniacal possessions, apparitions, visions, trances, ecstasies, miraculous healings, and productions of disease or occult powers possessed by peculiar individuals over persons and things. They form the staple not only of ignorant credulity, but of such creeds as spiritualism, theosophy, the mind cure, and many others which today number educated devotees by the hundreds of thousands. The most striking of these phenomena are apparitions in which the percipient firmly believes that he sees, hears, touches, or is otherwise brought into direct contact with real immaterial existences. They range in character from sublime spiritual visions to the inspirations of trance mediums, visions of ghosts and uncanny experiences in haunted houses. A friend of mine, for example, an accomplished man of letters and perfectly sane, on ascending the staircase in his house, met on the landing a stranger who saluted him courteously and passed by him down the stairs and out of doors, though he found on inquiry that no one else knew of her presence. There was a lady. And he met that stranger the next time he went up those stairs, and again, until, putting his hand out to stop her, she vanished into empty air. This is a perfectly well-authenticated ghost. There is another class of occult facts that have greatly stimulated the belief in the supernatural, namely premonitions. One is about to sail on, say, the Bourgogne, which sank in 1898, but on reaching the dock is suddenly stopped by an intense feeling that one must not go on board. Common sense is paralyzed. One's feet simply will not move toward the ship, and one waits for another vessel, with the result of saving one's life. These premonitions are often extraordinary and overwhelm the mind with an intense and irresistible conviction that they proceed from an agency other than ourselves. A more striking effect is produced by so-called post-hypnotic suggestion, one of the most remarkable discoveries in psychology. This is a suggestion given during the hypnotic trance that produces an automatic act after the subject is awakened and no longer directly under the hypnotic influence. The French neurologist Hippolyte Bernheim reported a remarkable instance of this. Dr. Bernheim said to X, a subject in the hypnotic state, "On what day will you be at liberty during the first week in October?" X replied, "On Wednesday." Bernheim then instructed X, "Then listen to me. Go to Dr. Lebo on the first Wednesday in October, and you will meet the President of the French Republic, who will give you a medal and a pension." X answered that he would go as instructed, but remembered nothing of it when he awoke. On October 3rd, 63 days after the suggestion, X presented himself at Dr. Lebo's office. He entered the room and, without paying attention to anyone, went across the room, made a respectful salute, and uttered the words, "Your Excellency." As he spoke rather low, Dr. Lebo asked to whom he was speaking, and X replied, "To the President of the French Republic." There is another characteristic of the mind as shown in hypnotism, which throws light on supernatural phenomena besides apparitions, audible phantasms, and premonitions. The subconscious personality is automatic, though often exhibiting intelligence and has a distinct consciousness of its own in which we have no share and often has a distinct moral character. Now, in our ordinary healthy experience, these two selves work together in harmony, the subconscious self entirely concealed and controlled by the conscious self. But in certain diseased states, the two personalities can be found working independently. It is in the hypnotic trance that this duality seems to come out most sharply, for hypnosis may probably be explained as the complete splitting apart of the two selves. And that concludes my reading of Benjamin Eli Smith. I dated this photo of the RKO Proctor movie theater by the release of the films Missing Evidence and Escape to Paradise in 1939. The year 2024 will mark the centennial anniversary of the publication of the Manifesto of Surrealism by André Breton. I'm sure you're all excited about that. Surrealism is based on the belief in the omnipotence of dream. It is an invisible ray that illuminates an absolute reality, the reality of the marvelous, the key to dreams. And I turn this photo upside down to make it surreal. This vertiginous scene of a Christmas tree suspended from a giant crane is from the construction of the New Rochelle Mall in 1976. This is a quiet Main Street scene. And this sidewalk scene of 50 years ago seems very familiar. It's fresh as today's news. Bridges repaired 90 years ago are being repaired again today. And the cycle of construction, renovation, demolition, and reconstruction seems limitless. This is the Asa Whitney House at the entrance to the Rochelle Park neighborhood. The source of this photo is the Color Camera Club of Westchester. This building should be recognizable by anyone who knows New Rochelle. The Kaufman Building, also known as the K Building, here under construction in 1929. The K Building was the only skyscraper in New Rochelle for many years. The sociologist Sam Bass Warner, in his classic study, Streetcar Suburbs, stated, quote, "The great fascination of urban study lies in the attempt to discover order in the vast confusion of the modern city. Everywhere there are ceaseless rows of structures and large masses. The continual confrontation of large objects prevents the visual comprehension of the city and forces the ordinary citizen to think of that environment in terms of one's own street or one's friends, or to think of the city in terms of an abstraction, like a political unit or ward. This explains why city dwellers cherish a river view, a hilltop, or a skyscraper panorama, which allows the occasional opportunity to grasp at one time the totality of the city." This is essentially the same shot, taken at night from the roof of the Odell Court Apartments in 1932. The train station on the left and the WCTU building is in the center. Our archive holds hundreds of aerial photographs, and many illustrate urban development plans to remodel the central business district to make way for the New York State Thruway. A terribly unfortunate event occurred in New Rochelle on May 17, 1968, a fire at the high school that caused extensive damage. This led the following year to community education about fire safety and firefighter demonstrations. And you can actually make out Smokey the Bear at the very right edge of this photograph. See Smokey there? In the aftermath of the high school fire, the Insurance Agent Association of New Rochelle provided essential assistance to the Board of Education in the settlement of the fire loss with a claim of over $6 million, one of the largest school losses ever paid in the U.S. to that time. We hold the records of this association in our archives. This scan of the former Wellness Center of the College of New Rochelle is from a digital photograph. That is, the photo was born digital and copied to a compact disc from which I made this copy to insert into my PowerPoint file. This is First National Bank on Lawton Street and a large mansion. The following sequence depicts professional workers on the job. The first is Anna Margata, who was the pharmacist of the New Rochelle Hospital from 1928. This woman is placing a disc on a turntable for an internal broadcasting system of Fort Slocum on David's Island. Here, Joseph Rosinski operates cartoon animation equipment of the Terrytoon Studio in 1951. And this is the machine shop of the Thanhouser Film Corporation. This is Dan Jones at a diesel-operated generator. This is the control room of the CBS network transmitter on Columbia Island, opposite David's Island in the Long Island Sound, which went into operation October 1941 to broadcast WABC radio. In this publicity stunt, the actress Ann Eden tightens the bolts of a giant insulator on the CBS transmitter on Columbia Island in preparation for its premiere broadcast on October 21st, 1941. Ann Eden was a socialite, model, and radio actress who was voted the most beautiful girl in radio in 1940. She married William Woodward Jr., heir to the manufacturer's Hanover Trust fortune. In a tragic accident, she shot and killed her husband, mistaking him for a burglar after they had returned home from a party in honor of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Many believed it was murder and no accident. Banished from high society, she later took her own life by toxic cyanide. On May 11th, 1914, the first freestanding library of New Rochelle opened its doors to the community, situated at the corner of Pintard Avenue and Main Street. As it does today, the library functioned not only as an educational center, but as a site and context for community service and cultural expression. The Carnegie Library, as it was known, served the community until 1979. This is the parking garage at the Huguenot Street end of Lawton Street. This building is the library where you are now sitting, which opened in September 1979. And in the upper right quadrant, you can also pick out the cupola on the City Hall. In 1938, the New Rochelle Public Library published a pamphlet titled University of the People. According to the sinologist Simon Leys, a university is a place where scholars seek truth, pursue and transmit knowledge for knowledge's sake, irrespective of the consequences, implications, and utility of the endeavor. In order to function, a university needs 5 things. 1, a community of scholars. 2, a good library for the humanities. 3, well-equipped laboratories for scientists. 4, students. 5, money. This photograph is obviously staged, a fantasy of how library books are distributed in the age of automobiles. Shall we try this today? Let's imagine that traffic will slow down enough on I-95 so that we can pass books back and forth between moving vehicles. In this case, the book being passed is Donald of China. No, not that Donald. Donald of China was William Henry Donald, an Australian journalist who lived in China for many years and befriended Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek. When we are finished reading Donald of China, the traveling library will stop by to pick it up at our doorstep at the end of the day and exchange it for another, just in time for us to settle in with a good novel after dinner. On August 21st, 1923, 100 years ago, just 100 years ago, the New York Tribune ran this headline: Venus and Adonis are exiled from the Garden of New Rochelle. A sculpture by Frederick Maimonides was the target of a complaint by an unnamed Puritan who loudly griped that the statue of Venus and Adonis was offensive and obscene, placed as it was on the front lawn of the New Rochelle Public Library. Both the library and the New Rochelle Art Association regretted the resulting publicity, and the statue was wrapped in canvas drapery to preserve the morals of the community. Never mind that the sculpture had been viewed a month earlier by 150,000 people at an outdoor exhibit in Manhattan. Interesting, too, that the original photo had a daub of whiteout applied to the face of the librarian, peeking too closely at the statue. So it seems that libraries were under attack 100 years ago, just as they are today. I imagine this cheeky young lad is cocking a snook at those who would smother our sculptures and canvas and censor our poetry. In the 20th century, New Rochelle was home to many well-known artists, illustrators, and sculptors. This is a street art exhibit in 1962. Lewis Mumford, historian of cities, claimed, "The city fosters art and is art. The city creates the theater and is the theater." Mumford argued that the mechanical thinking of many urban planners distract us from what really matters in urban society, the social drama of the city as an achievement of civilization, culture, art, and theater. This photo is from an exhibit of the New Rochelle Art Association titled Fabulous Fakes. In his novel, The Recognitions, William Gaddis provided a far-ranging account of forgeries and fakes in the art world as a lens to the spurious commercialism of our society. He said, quote, "A product would drop out of sight overnight without advertising. I don't care what it is, a book or a brand of soap, it would drop out of sight. We've had the age of faith, we've had the age of reason. This is the age of publicity." Trinity Episcopal Church is depicted here in a hand-painted colorized photo. It's one of two early colorized photos in our archive, possibly done by the artist Frederick Remington, who lived in New Rochelle. This is a studio photo of Mr. David Lowell Johnson, who appeared as the New Year's baby on the cover of Saturday Evening Post, January 1935, drawn by Joseph Leyendecker. Mr. Johnson's photo was taken in 2003. This is Amelia. I don't know which one is Amelia, and I don't know anything more about her, but this is Amelia enjoying lemon snap cookies with her friends, summer of 1915. They are also enjoying Jacob Rupert Extra, a pre-prohibition beer brewed in New York City. And as we see here, Jacob Rupert Extra was also endorsed and served by the Irish Benevolent Society at their Benevolent Hall Cafe. This is Teddy's Deli, serving Italian cuisine and more. New Rochelle has been cited among the most ethnically diverse small cities in the United States. I first believed this photo of a Jewish boy in a prayer shawl at Rosh Hashanah was a scene in New Rochelle. Not so. I traced it back to the Library of Congress. The original exists as part of the George Grantham Bain Collection, an early news picture agency. In our Antonia Valencia oral history collection documents the history of Mexican immigrants to New Rochelle. Seen here, Antonio Valencia helped to institute Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral to honor the Virgin of Guadalupe in 2001. This is Jake Lance with a top hat and toy trombone in 1938. I suspect this may have something to do with the 250th anniversary of New Rochelle celebrated that year. And this is the cupola from the top of the City Hall being relocated to the New Rochelle Rowing Club. The person in charge of this move was none other than Lieutenant Dominic Ruzis. As all rivers flow into the sea, so the men of New Rochelle are attracted to the waters of Long Island Sound, even in the frostiest condition. At Fort Slocum on David's Island, women performed during a USO show. And the pipe dream of developing David's Island has remained a pipe dream. This photo of a proposed bridge to David's Island has obviously been altered by Photoshop. This is Fort Slocum as seen from the waters of Long Island Sound. And I will conclude with 3 short readings. The first is from the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Existence. Existence is beyond the power of words to define. Words may be used, but none of them are absolute. Existence of this world of things and people renews their never needing to exist. And whether a person dispassionately sees to the core of life or passionately sees only the surface, the core and the surface are essentially the same. The highest purpose is to have no purpose at all. This puts one in accord with nature in her manner of operation. This poem is The Infinite by Sid Corman. Always dear to me was this far hill and this hedge that shuts off so large a part of the ultimate horizon from the view. But sitting here gazing, the endlessness of all that space there, the superhuman silences, the most profound quiet I imagine into thought, where the heart nearly comes to grief. And as the wind is heard rustling through these plants, I find myself comparing infinite silence with this sound. I think of the eternal, of seasons past, and the all too present in its uproar. And so, through this immensity, my thought is drowned, and shipwreck most desired of this sea. I will conclude with a reading of the final page of Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Finnegan's Wake has been called the terminal book. I am passing out. Oh, bitter ending. I'll slip away before they're up. They'll never see, nor know, nor miss me. And it's old, it's sad, and old, it's sad and weary. I go back to you, my cold father, my cold, mad father, my cold, mad, fiery father, to the near sight of the mere size of him, the miles and miles of it, moan and owning, make me sea silt salt sick, and I rush, my only, into your arms. I see them rising. Save me from those terrible prongs. 2 more, 2 Mormons more. So, Ava Laval, my leaves have drifted from me. All, but one clings still. I'll bear it on me, to remind me of. Lift, so this morning ours. Yes, carry me along, Tatty, like you done through the toy fair. If I seen him bearing down on me now under white spread wings, like he'd come from archangels, I'd think I'd die down over his feet, humbly dumbly, only to wash up. Yes, Tid, there's where. First, we pass through grass behush the bush to. Wish, a gull, gulls, far calls. Coming far, end here, us then. Finnegan, take, but softly remember me, till 1,000 feet. Lips, the keys to, given, away, alone, a lost, a last, a loved, along the. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I also have to thank my colleagues here at the library. We all work together as a wonderful team, but Lisa, Patricia, Chris, Ed, Geraldo, Toby, and Larry are my constant companions. I couldn't have done this without them, and I thank them. And I would also like to recognize a volunteer who works for the archive, Psalm Tanner. Could you just raise your hand? There's Psalm back there. She's been helping me in the last three months to organize an audio-visual collection while I'm working on the photography collection. And they're both interesting projects, and she has been an enormous help, so we appreciate that too. That's overlong, I know, but there are Halloween snacks outside. There are also copies of Fungi magazine. Please help yourself to those. And I'm glad to see you all this afternoon with so many friends. That's it. Thank you very much.